A housekeeper accepts a job in a luxurious triplex under strict orders and an unusual rule: never approach the stepson. When she meets the wheelchair-bound, isolated and wounded boy, she uncovers a cruel secret, hidden behind perfection. The Portland sky poured rain that Thursday in March. Grace Oliver, 42, watched the drops stream down the bus window while mentally calculating the month's bills. Her salary as a day laborer barely covered the rent for the small townhouse in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. Her children's school fees, the installments for school supplies and basic expenses. Since Julian had passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, she had single-handedly raised Luke, 15, and Amy, 12. Next stop, Pearl District, the driver announced. Grace adjusted her worn umbrella and the scarf protecting her shoulder-length curly hair. She got off the bus and walked 3 blocks in the rain to the imposing cedarwood tower, a glass and concrete skyscraper that rose majestically among mansions and designer boutiques. "Good morning, ma'am. How may I help you?" asked the uniformed doorman, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I have an appointment with Mrs. Patricia Montgomery, penthouse 1201. The man checked a list on his computer, made a quick call and nodded. "You may go up. Passenger elevator on the right." The elevator was spacious, mirrored and fragrant. Grace felt small inside, with her worn purse and simple uniform, black pants and a white t-shirt. As the numbers ascended on the electronic panel, she repeated to herself that she needed this temporary job. The domestic services agency had promised it would be well paid. 3 weeks of intense work to prepare the residents for a charity event. The amount offered would cover her children's tuition for the next semester and still leave enough to pay off the debt at the neighborhood grocery store. When the doors opened, Grace was greeted by a private hall decorated with Italian marble and a double dark carved wooden door. Before she even rang the doorbell, the door opened. Punctuality. "Good start," said a tall, elegant woman, approximately 38 years old, with perfectly straightened blonde hair and clothes Grace had only seen in fashion magazines. "Good morning. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm Grace from Home & Company Agency. Come in. Don't drip on my carpet." Patricia made a quick gesture, indicating where Grace should leave her umbrella. "Take off your shoes, too." The triplex was stunning. The first floor, an integrated space, blended a living room, dining room, and a kitchen that looked straight out of a TV show, with state-of-the-art appliances. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Portland, with Washington Park visible in the distance, even in the rain. "Let's establish the rules immediately," Patricia began, walking through the room while Grace followed her in silence. "My husband, Dr. Richard Montgomery, is one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the country and owner of the Montgomery Health System. In 3 weeks, we will host a charity dinner to raise funds for a new pediatric wing. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities, people who matter will be present." Grace nodded, observing every detail of the sophisticated decor, calculating the work ahead of her. "This event needs to be impeccable," Patricia continued. "You will work from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, including weekends. Your job is to clean, organize, and assist the vendors who will come to prepare the space. Zero tolerance for delays, failures, or sloppiness. If you can't handle it, you will be replaced immediately and without recommendation." "I understand, ma'am. You can trust my work." Patricia led her through the first floor, explaining each room in detail, pointing out valuable objects that required special care. Then they ascended a curvilinear staircase to the second floor, where the bedrooms were located. "This is our bedroom," she said, showing a suite larger than Grace's entire apartment. "Here's the walk-in closet. Here's my personal office. And this is the guest room." Passing a closed door at the end of the corridor, Patricia stopped abruptly and her tone of voice changed. "This room is off-limits for your work. It's Paul's room, my stepson. He has health issues. You are not to enter there. You are not to speak to him. You are not even to knock on the door. I personally take care of everything concerning him." Grace felt a chill down her spine at the sudden change in her employer's demeanor. "He's just a troubled teenager seeking attention," Patricia continued with a forced smile. "His mother passed away a few years ago, and he never accepted my presence. He invents stories, manipulates people. Dr. Richard preferred to keep him at home instead of a specialized school, against my recommendation. But we don't need that headache now, do we? Yes, Mum, Grace replied, intrigued. They went up to the third floor, where there was a gourmet area, a small cinema, a game room, and an indoor pool with a city view. This will be the center of the event, Patricia explained. That needs to be sparkling. The vendors will start arriving next week. Decorators, florists, catering staff. Your job is to ensure everything is perfect when they leave. Back on the first floor, Patricia showed a small service room attached to the laundry area. You will sleep here during these 3 weeks. I don't want time lost with commuting. On Sundays, you can leave after lunch and return before 10 p.m. Any questions? Grace hesitated. She hadn't planned to sleep at work, but the offered amount would compensate for the sacrifice. Luke could take care of his sister for a few weeks. He already did when she took on extra cleaning jobs on weekends. No, ma'am. Do I start tomorrow? No, you start now. Your uniform is in the service room closet. Change and start with the first floor. Dr. Richard will arrive late today, but I want him to notice the difference as soon as he walks in. Alone in the impersonal small room, Grace sent messages to her children, explaining the situation. Then she put on the grey uniform with the Montgomery family emblem, a luxury that seemed excessive for a cleaner. As she organized her few belongings, she heard a muffled sound coming through the wall. They had sounded like crying, but it was impossible to be sure with the rain pounding on the window. Grace began her work on the lower floor, impressed by the quantity of expensive and delicate objects. Around 5 p.m., while cleaning the living room windows, she noticed the reflection of a figure on the second floor, a young man in a wheelchair, observing her from above the mezzanine before quickly disappearing. Patricia left for dinner with friends at 7 p.m., leaving a list of tasks for the evening. Dr. Richard will arrive around 10 p.m. Don't bother him with unnecessary questions. With the house in silence, Grace continued her meticulous work, but her mind was uneasy. The muffled crying, the strict prohibition, the boy in the wheelchair, Patricia's dark expression when speaking of her stepson, something didn't feel right. When she finished cleaning the first floor, it was past 9 p.m. Exhausted, she headed to the small room for a quick shower before her employer's arrival. Passing through the corridor leading to the laundry room, she heard the sound again, clearer now, undoubtedly a suppressed sob. It came from the second floor. Grace's second morning of work in the Montgomery penthouse began early. She had slept restlessly, disturbed by the sounds she had heard the night before. Dr. Richard had arrived late and hadn't noticed her presence. Only the sound of heavy footsteps on the first floor, and then silence. Patricia had appeared at 6:30 a.m. in the service room, handing her a to-do list and reminding her that breakfast should be ready by 7:15 a.m. As she prepared fruits, yogurts and bread in the immaculate kitchen, Grace watched Dr. Richard descend the staircase. He was a tall man, athletically built with neatly trimmed grey hair. He wore a navy blue suit that surely cost more than everything she owned. "Good morning." "You must be the new employee," he said, checking messages on his phone without really looking at Grace. "Yes, sir." "Grace Oliver. It's a pleasure. Richard Montgomery. Patricia has already explained your duties, I imagine. I'll be at the hospital late today. We have a complex surgery." Patricia joined them, impeccably dressed and made up as if ready for a photo shoot. She kissed her husband's cheek and poured him a cup of coffee. "Darling, please confirm with your assistant if all VIP guests have RSVP'd. We need to finalize the list for the catering," she said, completely ignoring Grace's presence. "Of course, my love. And Paul, has he had breakfast?" An almost imperceptible shadow crossed Patricia's face. "He's still asleep. He took his medication last night and is always drowsy." "Don't worry, I'll take care of him as always." Dr. Richard nodded, satisfied. "What would he do without you, wouldn't he?" "I'm a lucky man." After a quick breakfast, Dr. Richard left. Patricia announced that she would be out for meetings with event vendors and would only be back in the late afternoon. "The task list is on the counter. And remember what we discussed about the second floor." As soon as she was alone, Grace worked quickly on the first floor. Her thoughts, however, kept returning to the mysterious stepson and the sounds she had heard. Around noon, while organizing the pantry, she heard a dull thud from upstairs, followed by a moan. Without hesitation, she went up the stairs. The second-floor corridor was silent, but one of the doors, the one Patricia had expressly forbidden, was ajar. Grace approached cautiously. Is anyone there? Do you need help? No response. Taking a deep breath, she gently pushed the door open. The room was large but strangely impersonal for a teenager. White walls without posters, functional furniture, a flat-screen TV and a bookshelf, with few books. No photos, mementos or personal items that indicated the inhabitant's personality. On the floor near the bed, a thin boy was trying to get up, leaning on his trembling arms. He looked about 13, with messy brown hair and dark eyes marked by deep dark circles. He wore simple blue pajamas and his wheelchair was overturned beside him. My God, what happened? Let me help you. Grace rushed to him, ignoring all of Patricia's orders. The boy looked at her, startled, like a cornered animal. You shouldn't be here. She'll be furious. Don't worry about that now. Let's get you up first. Carefully, Grace helped him sit on the bed and then righted the wheelchair. I'm Grace, the new employee. You must be Paul. He nodded, watching her with suspicion. She told you not to talk to me, didn't she? All employees get that order. Yes, but I can't ignore someone who needs help. What happened to the chair? Paul looked away. I slipped when I was trying to reach a book. It happens sometimes. Grace noticed a purplish bruise on the boy's forearm, partially covered by his pajama sleeve. It didn't look recent, but it wasn't very old either. Have you had breakfast? Are you hungry? Paul's eyes lit up for a moment. I'm starving. She said she'd bring something when she got back, but Grace looked around and noticed a tray with untouched food on the dresser, a dried-out sandwich, and a half-empty glass of juice. By its appearance, it must have been there since the night before. I'll make you something fresh. Do you want to come down to the kitchen with me? Paul shook his head negatively. Better not. If she arrives and finds me out of the room, there will be trouble. For both of us. There was something in the way he spoke, a mixture of fear and resignation that didn't suit someone so young. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, momentarily forgetting her tasks. Paul, is everything all right here? With you and your stepmother? The boy remained silent for a long moment, as if evaluating whether he could trust her. Finally, in a low voice, he began to speak. My mother died 3 years ago. Leukemia. It was just me and my dad until he met Patricia at the hospital. She was an administrative consultant there. At first she was different, kind, attentive. She always brought me presents, talked about trips we'd take together. Dad was so happy. Paul looked out the window where the rain continued to fall. They got married quickly, less than a year after they met. We moved here. Before, we lived in a house in West Lynne. That's when everything started to change. Change how? Grace asked softly. First, it was small things. She started forgetting to give me my leg pain medication. She said I was exaggerating, that I wanted attention. Then she started limiting who could visit me. My school friends, my physical therapist who came twice a week. One by one, everyone was pushed away. Paul's stomach rumbled audibly, and Grace felt a pang in her heart. Then came the new will. I overheard them talking. Dad put this penthouse, some properties and shares in her name. That's when things really got worse. Paul hesitated, as if afraid to continue. Grace took his hand, noticing it trembled slightly. You can trust me, Paul. When my dad isn't here, she humiliates me, says I'm a burden, that he'd be much happier if he didn't have to worry about me. Sometimes she hides my pain medication and only gives it to me if I beg. She's deliberately overturned my chair, left me on the floor for hours, and when Dad gets home, she's the perfect, dedicated stepmother. Have you told your father about this? Paul's eyes filled with tears. Many times. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm jealous that I don't accept his new wife. Patricia convinced him that I'm manipulative, that I use my condition to get attention. The last time I tried, he got so angry he forbade me from bringing it up again. Grace felt a lump in her throat. She knew that kind of situation well. Vulnerable people whose voices were systematically silenced, invisible to the eyes of those who should protect them. How did this happen? She asked, discreetly pointing to the bruise on the boy's arm. Paul lowered his head. She held me too tightly when I refused to take a medicine that makes me dizzy. She said it was so I would sleep and not bother them during a dinner they had here last week. At that moment, they heard the elevator arriving on the ground floor. Paul paled. You need to get out of here. Quickly. Grace helped him sit in the wheelchair. I'll bring you food later when she leaves again. I promise. As she closed the bedroom door, Grace made a silent decision. This couldn't continue. If his father wouldn't believe his own son, something more forceful than words would be needed. She would need evidence. She hurried down the stairs and resumed her tasks in the kitchen, feigning normalcy when Patricia entered carrying bags from expensive stores. "Grace, separate these napkin samples and table arrangements. I want you to clean all the chandeliers today, starting with the dining room one. The decorating staff will begin setting up structures tomorrow." "Yes." "Ma'am," Grace replied, avoiding looking directly at Patricia, fearing her eyes would reveal what she had discovered. While organizing the samples, Grace mentally formulated her plan. Her old cell phone had a simple camera, but it would work. She would need to be discreet, patient, and above all courageous. She had promised herself years ago, when she lost Julian, that she would never turn her back on someone in a vulnerable situation. That night, as she placed a plate of warm food under Paul's bedroom door, Grace made a silent vow. That boy would not continue to suffer, not while she could do something about it. The following days in the Montgomery penthouse settled into a tense routine. Grace worked tirelessly, fulfilling all of Patricia's demands perfectly, while discreetly observing the household patterns. Dr. Richard rarely appeared. He left before dawn and returned after 10 at night, often going straight to his room without dinner. Patricia, meanwhile, divided her time between social engagements, meetings with event vendors, and long calls with what appeared to be a lawyer. In her moments of absence, Grace visited Paul. She brought him fresh food, talked with him, brought new books from the first-floor library. The boy, initially distrustful, began to open up more and more. He spoke of his dream of studying medicine like his father, how he loved astronomy, and the happy times with his mother, Beatrice, before her illness. "Mom always said the stars were windows to heaven," Paul said one afternoon, showing Grace a small telescope hidden under his bed. This was her last gift. "Patricia tried to throw it away last year, saying it collected dust, but I managed to hide it." But it wasn't just happy memories that emerged in these conversations. Gradually, a disturbing pattern of psychological abuse and neglect began to reveal itself. Paul recounted how Patricia controlled his medications, using them as a form of punishment or reward, how she isolated him from any external contact, including medical appointments, how she frequently insinuated that he would be sent to a special institution if he continued causing problems. "Last week, when I complained of pain, she told me it would be much easier for everyone if I disappeared like my mother," Paul confessed, his eyes fixed on his own hands. And then she smiled as if it were just a joke. On Friday of that first week, Grace decided it was time to act. During her Sunday off, she retrieved her old cell phone from a drawer at home and brought it hidden in the inner pocket of her bag. It wasn't the most modern device, but the camera worked well and had enough space to record videos. The opportunity arose the following Monday. Patricia had gone out to resolve matters at the printing company that would produce the event invitations. Grace helped Paul with his bath and took him to sunbathe on the bedroom balcony, something he said he was rarely allowed to do. "Paul, I need to ask you something important," she said, adjusting the wheelchair so the morning sun wouldn't bother the boy's eyes. "Do you authorize me to document what's happening?" "With photos and videos?" The boy stared at her, alarmed. "Why? What are you going to do with it?" "Your father needs to see the truth. He can ignore words, but images." Grace chose her words carefully. "I don't intend to cause a scandal or expose you, but we need concrete proof." Paul remained silent for a long moment, looking at the city stretching below them. Finally, he replied, "If she finds out, she'll send me away. I heard her talking about an institute in Canada." "I won't let that happen," Grace assured him. "I'll be extremely careful." That same afternoon, Grace strategically positioned her cell phone in her apron pocket, with the camera partially visible through a small tear she had deliberately made. She was cleaning the hallway when she heard Patricia's voice in Paul's room. "What's that smell?" His stepmother's voice sounded irritated. "Have you been getting out of bed without permission?" "I needed some fresh air," Paul replied. "The window was—" The sound of something being thrown against the wall interrupted the sentence. Grace approached silently, activating her phone's camera. "How many times do I need to repeat the rules?" Patricia hissed. "This room, this bed, this is your place. Not the balcony, not the living room, not any other space in this house." Through the crack in the door, Grace could see Patricia leaning over Paul's chair. her fingers squeezing the boy's arm in the same spot as the previous. "Bruce, man, it hurts," Paul protested in pain. Patricia let out a short laugh. "You don't know what real pain is. Do you know how much time your father and I, invest in you? The expensive treatments, the specialist doctors, the adaptations in the house, for what? For you to continue being a deadweight, a constant reminder of your father's weakness." Grace filmed everything, feeling her heart race with anger and fear. Patricia continued, "You know what would be easier? If you just disappeared. An accident, perhaps. Your chair falling down the stairs, choking during the night when no one is around. Accidents happen all the time with people we're special." Paul paled. "You wouldn't do that." "Of course not," Patricia smiled, stroking the boy's face with false tenderness. "I'm your dedicated stepmother. Everyone says so. Your father tells anyone who will listen how wonderful I am for agreeing to take care of you. But life would be so much simpler." She moved away, walking to the dresser where the medications were kept. "Time for your afternoon medicine. For the pain you complain about so much." She picked up a bottle, shaking it. "Or maybe I'll save it for another day. Do you think you deserve relief today?" "Please," Paul murmured. "My legs are—" "Your legs," Patricia interrupted, putting the bottle in her pocket. "Your useless legs? It's always about you, isn't it? Never about me, about the sacrifice I make. Well, today you can feel some real pain. For a change." When Patricia turned to leave, Grace quickly moved away, pretending to clean the staircase railing. The stepmother passed her without a glance, descending to the first floor. Grace waited a few minutes before entering Paul's room. The boy was huddled in his chair, eyes closed, breathing with difficulty. "I filmed everything," Grace whispered, quickly showing him her phone. "I'll keep it in a safe place." In the following days, Grace collected more evidence. She captured Patricia, hiding Paul's medication in a locked drawer in the office. She recorded moments when she left the boy without adequate meals. She documented cruel comments about his disability and insinuations about accidents that could happen. On Thursday, a week before the big event, Grace tried a direct approach with Dr. Richard. She found him alone in the library, reviewing documents. "Excuse me, doctor. May I speak with you for a minute?" Richard barely lifted his eyes from the papers. "Be brief, please. I have a video conference in 15 minutes. It's about your son, Paul. I'm concerned about—" "Stop!" Richard raised his hand, interrupting her. "If Patricia finds out you entered his room, you'll be fired immediately. But, doctor, something is wrong. Your son is not being well treated when you're not home." Richard finally looked at her, irritation evident on his face. "Let me guess. Paul told you terrible stories about how the evil stepmother mistreats him? How she hides his medicine, leaves him without food, threatens him?" The accuracy of the description left Grace momentarily speechless. "That's exactly what's happening, sir." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "My son is extremely intelligent and manipulative. He's been doing this since he lost his mother. He's invented stories about all the nurses, caregivers, and maids who have passed through this house. He's trying to sabotage my marriage because he doesn't accept Patricia. Dr. Richard, with all due respect, I saw—" "What did you see?" "Bruises? He causes them himself. Food not eaten. He refuses to eat when Patricia serves him. Delayed medication? He hides it to accuse her later." Richard closed the document folder forcefully. "Patricia is the only person who has had enough patience to deal with him. She gave up her career to take care of my son while I work. And you, a stranger who's been here for only a few days, come to tell me she's—" "What a cruel person?" Grace stood firm. "Sir, if you could just see—" "Enough!" "I'm not continuing this conversation. You are here to work, not to interfere in family matters you don't understand. This is your only warning. Mention this again and you will be dismissed." Richard left the library, leaving Grace paralyzed. It was exactly as Paul had described. His father completely blind to the situation, manipulated by Patricia's lies. That night, as she organized the special dishes that would be used for the event, Grace was surprised by Patricia in the kitchen. "I heard you were talking to my husband today," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "about matters that don't concern you." Grace continued her work, trying to maintain her composure. "I merely expressed a concern, ma'am." "Concern?" Patricia approached, invading her personal space. "You know what concerns me? Employees who overstep boundaries, who think they can meddle in families they barely know." Opening her expensive purse, Patricia took out a small jewelry box. My sapphire necklace is missing. A wedding gift from my husband, valued at over $100,000. Her eyes narrowed. It would be a shame if it were found among your belongings, wouldn't it? The threat was clear. Grace felt a chill, but she didn't back down. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Montgomery? Threatening? No, dear. I'm just commenting on a possibility. After all, accidents happen. Objects disappear. People lose jobs and reputations. Patricia put the case away. I hope we understand each other. When Patricia left, Grace leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. The situation had escalated dangerously. It was no longer just about documenting the abuses. Now she herself was being threatened. That night, she transferred all the videos and photos she had collected to a small USB drive, which she hid inside a hollowed-out bar of soap in her toiletry bag. If Patricia tried to plant the necklace in her belongings, at least the evidence would be safe. Only 1 week remained until the event. Grace knew she would need something irrefutable, something that even Dr. Richard couldn't deny. And she would need to act fast, before Patricia carried out her threats, against Paul or against herself. The following week transformed the Montgomery penthouse into a hive of activity. Vendors came and went constantly, carrying metal structures, fine fabrics, imported flowers, and sound equipment. A small decorating team had set up an elegant stage on the 3rd floor for the orchestra that would play during the charity cocktail party. On the 1st floor, buffet tables began to be strategically positioned, while technicians installed special lighting. Amidst the organized chaos, Grace performed her duties with efficiency and discretion. Despite Patricia's threat, she continued to visit Paul whenever possible, now with even more care. The boy seemed increasingly disheartened, as if he sensed that something serious was about to happen. She's been talking about sending me away after the event, Paul confided one afternoon, while Grace helped him change clothes. I heard her mention an institute in Banff, Canada on the phone. She said it was perfect for difficult cases like mine. Grace felt her heart clench. I won't let that happen, Paul, trust me. On Wednesday, 3 days before the event, Grace found an opportunity to review her evidence material. She now had 12 videos and several photos, documenting different situations of mistreatment. As she organized the images on the small USB drive, she heard agitated voices coming from the 1st floor, Patricia arguing with someone on the phone. I don't care what the condominium regulations say. This event is to raise funds for a pediatric hospital, for heaven's sake. How could anyone object to that? Patricia's voice sounded irritated. My husband is one of the most respected neurosurgeons in this country. The guests are important people. No one here is interested in disturbing the precious peace of the neighbors. Grace finished organizing the material and put the USB drive back in its hiding place. When she went downstairs, she found Patricia pacing back and forth in the living room, still on the phone. Then forward the complaint to the condominium's lawyer. We have all the necessary authorizations. The event will happen, and that's not up for discussion. Hanging up, Patricia noticed Grace's presence. What are you looking at? Get back to work. The catering staff will arrive in an hour to test the equipment. I want the kitchen impeccable. Yes, Mom, Grace replied, heading to the kitchen. Later that day, while Dr. Richard had a quick lunch before returning to the hospital, Patricia casually mentioned, Darling, I was thinking, maybe we should consider that institute Dr. Mendez recommended. For Paul. Dr. Richard frowned, putting down his fork. I thought we had decided to wait until the end of the year to make that decision. I know, but Patricia sighed dramatically. He's becoming increasingly difficult. He refuses to cooperate with physical therapy, barely touches the food I prepare, has been having episodes of aggression. Aggression? Richard seemed surprised. He's never been aggressive. You're not here during the day. Patricia placed her hand over Richard's. You don't see how he treats me when we're alone. Just yesterday he threw a book at me when I tried to help him with his exercises. Grace, who was discreetly tidying the adjacent table, had to control herself not to intervene. It was the opposite of what was happening. Paul was extremely peaceful, even when provoked. Perhaps he's just nervous with all this activity for the event, Richard suggested, looking uncomfortable. Perhaps, Patricia agreed with false resignation, but I worry about what might happen during the party. What? If he has one of his episodes? In front of all those important guests? Richard checked his watch, clearly anxious to end the conversation. We'll talk about this after the event, all right? Now I need to go back to the hospital. We have a complex surgery this afternoon. When Richard left, Patricia shot a warning glance at Grace. What you heard stays here. Understood. Yes, ma'am, Grace replied, keeping her eyes down. Thursday dawned with a tense atmosphere in the penthouse. Patricia was particularly irritable, criticizing the work of all the vendors. The decorating team redid the central flower arrangement 3 times. A waiter hired for the event was dismissed for dropping a glass, and even the chef responsible for the catering received a public reprimand for suggesting a menu change. Grace kept busy, following instructions and avoiding drawing attention. Around noon, she took advantage of a moment when Patricia was on the 3rd floor with the lighting team to visit Paul. She found him trying to reach a book on a high shelf. "Let me get that for you," Grace offered, approaching. "Thanks. I'm bored here." "She took my tablet last night. Said it was punishment for not eating all my dinner." As Grace handed him the book, a biography of Stephen Hawking, Paul asked in a low voice, "Do you really think you'll be able to convince my dad?" Grace sat beside him. "I have enough evidence now. I just need the right moment to show it. What if he still doesn't believe? Then we'll show it to other people. I won't give up on you, Paul, I promise." Grace had barely finished speaking when they heard quick footsteps in the hallway. There was no time to leave. The door burst open and Patricia entered, her face contorted with fury. "I knew it," she screamed, advancing toward Grace. "You've been disobeying my explicit orders, coming in here, feeding this manipulator's fantasies. Ms. Montgomery, Shut up! You're fired. To pack your things and leave in 15 minutes, or I'll call building security to remove you." Paul intervened, his voice trembling. "Please don't send her away. She was just bringing me a book." Patricia turned to her stepson, her eyes flashing with hatred. Always you causing problems, ruining everything." With a sudden movement, Patricia grabbed the wheelchair and shoved it forcefully against the wall. Paul cried out, more from fright than pain. Grace instinctively placed herself between the two. "Stop. He's just a child. Get out of my way! This is my house, he's my stepson, and you are nothing here." Patricia tried to push Grace away, but she stood firm. Realizing the situation was getting out of control, Patricia backed off, adjusted her pearl necklace, and took a deep breath to compose herself. "All right, I'm calling my husband right now. We'll see what he says about all this." As Patricia left to make the call, Grace quickly checked if Paul was hurt. The boy seemed scared but physically unharmed. The chair had hit the wall, but he was secure in the seat. "I'm so sorry about this," Paul murmured, tears in his eyes. "Now you'll lose your job because of me." "Don't worry about me," Grace squeezed his hand. "Just worry about staying safe. Don't provoke her, don't resist. Just until tomorrow, understood?" Paul nodded, confused. "What happens tomorrow?" Before Grace could answer, Patricia returned, phone in hand. "Richard is in surgery and cannot be disturbed, but I left a message detailing your inappropriate behavior." She looked at her watch. "Your 15 minutes are ticking. I suggest you start packing your things." Grace maintained her composure. "Mrs. Montgomery, I apologize for disobeying your orders, but firing me now, 2 days before the event, would not be prudent. Who will help with the final preparations? Who will clean up after the party?" Patricia hesitated, considering the argument. It was a valid point. Replacing Grace at this stage would be problematic. "You stay until Sunday," she finally decided. "But you are not to approach this room again, nor speak to Paul. And if you try any tricks, like speaking to Richard, know that I still have that necklace to be found among your things." "Understood," Grace replied, showing no emotion. The next morning, the eve of the big event, the Montgomery penthouse was buzzing. A professional cleaning team had been hired to put the finishing touches on all the rooms. Waiters rehearsed the circulation of canapes, while a sommelier tested the imported crystal glasses. On the 3rd floor, the chamber orchestra performed a final rehearsal. Grace worked non-stop since 6 in the morning, meticulously following Patricia's detailed instructions. She had no opportunity to see Paul, but kept her ears open for any sound coming from the 2nd floor. Around 3 in the afternoon, while organizing the pantry with supplies for the party, she heard a dull thud followed by a muffled cry. Without hesitation, she ran up the stairs, momentarily forgetting Patricia's threats. In the 2nd floor hallway, she found Paul fallen on the floor, His wheelchair overturned a few feet away. The boy was clutching his right wrist, his face contorted in pain. "What happened?" Grace asked, kneeling beside him. "I tried to go to the bathroom by myself," Paul explained between groans. "The wheel got caught on the rug and I fell." Grace examined his wrist, which was already starting to swell. "It could be a sprain or even a fracture. We need to take you to the hospital. What's going on here?" Patricia appeared in the doorway, wearing a fitting dress for the next day's event. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Grace helping Paul. "He fell and hurt his wrist," Grace explained. "He needs medical attention." Patricia approached, assessing the situation with cold eyes. "Nonsense. It's just a slight bump. Paul has always been clumsy and dramatic. A few minutes of ice will fix it. With all due respect, ma'am, his wrist is swelling rapidly. It could be a fracture. And since when are you a doctor?" Patricia smiled sarcastically. "Put him back in his chair and get back to your work. I'm tired of your insistence on getting involved where you're not called." Paul moaned again when they tried to move him. Grace noticed tears in the boy's eyes. "Mrs. Montgomery, if it's just a slight bump as you say, there would be no problem with Dr. Richard examining him when he arrives, right?" Patricia's smile disappeared. "Richard is overwhelmed with work and preparations for tomorrow. I won't bother him with trivialities." With effort, they managed to sit Paul back in his chair. His face was pale, and he bit his lip to keep from crying out loud. "I'll get some ice," Grace said, casting one last worried look at the boy before leaving. In the kitchen, while preparing an ice pack, Grace made a decision. She took out her cell phone and sent messages to her children, letting them know she wouldn't be coming home that night, even though it was her day off. Then she hid the phone in an inner pocket of her apron, the same one she had used to film the previous abuses. Something told her that this night would be decisive, and she would be prepared. The morning of the big event began before sunrise. The Montgomery penthouse was completely transformed. The third floor, now a dazzling ballroom, displayed glittering crystal chandeliers, extravagant floral arrangements, and an elegant stage for the orchestra. On the first floor, strategically arranged buffet tables showcased fine china and imported crystal glasses. The decor followed a theme in golden and blue tones, with silver accents that reflected the specially installed lighting for the occasion. Grace hadn't slept well. She had spent part of the night discreetly observing the second-floor corridor, fearing Patricia would do something to Paul. Around 4 in the morning, exhausted, she finally managed to fall asleep, only to be awakened at 6 by the head housekeeper, specially hired for the event. "Grace, Mrs. Montgomery wants you in the kitchen immediately. The catering team needs help with organizing the utensils." The kitchen was a hive of activity. Renowned chefs and their assistants worked in sync, preparing elaborate canapés and sophisticated dishes that would be served to the guests. Grace received detailed instructions on where each item should be stored and how it should be presented. Patricia appeared around 9, her hair already done by a professional hairdresser who had set up a small salon in the guest bedroom. She walked through each room, pointing out almost invisible imperfections, demanding adjustments to the position of the flowers, the folds of the napkins, the arrangement of the silverware. "The event starts at 8 tonight," she announced to the team gathered in the living room. "I want all vendors and support staff out of here by 7. Only waiters, bartenders, and musicians remain. Grace, you leave at 6. I don't want cleaning staff circulating when the first guests arrive." "Yes, ma'am," Grace replied, avoiding Patricia's gaze. "The first to arrive will be the mayor and the governor, then the Minister of Health, followed by artists and business leaders. The press will have controlled access, only selected photographers and journalists from specific outlets." Patricia consulted her tablet. "Richard will arrive at 7 to get ready. Paul will not participate, obviously." This caught Grace's attention. "The host's son won't be present?" Patricia gave her an icy look. "Paul doesn't like crowds. He'll stay in his room where it will be more comfortable for him." "I understand." Grace lowered her eyes, feigning submission. Throughout the day, while assisting with the organization, Grace tried to find a moment to check on Paul. His injured wrist from the previous day seriously worried her. However, Patricia seemed to be everywhere at once, making it impossible to go up to the second floor unnoticed. Around 5 in the afternoon, when most of the preparations were finished and the catering team was making final adjustments to the dishes, Grace saw her opportunity. Patricia had gone down to the building lobby to personally check the hall decoration that would welcome the guests. Quickly, Grace went up the stairs to Paul's room. She found him lying down, his arm supported by pillows. His wrist was even more swollen than the day before, now with a worrying purplish discoloration. "My God, Paul, this needs urgent medical attention," she exclaimed, carefully examining the injury. "She said it's just a minor sprain," Paul replied, his voice weak. "She put some ointment on it last night, but the pain only got worse." Grace noticed that the boy was feverish and looked weak. "Have you eaten today?" Paul shook his head. "I'm not hungry. I just wanted the pain to go away." "I'll get you some painkillers and something to eat," Grace promised. "Then I'll talk to your father as soon as he arrives, no matter what Patricia says." As she left the room, Grace almost collided with Patricia, who was coming up the stairs. "What are you doing here?" the stepmother asked, her voice dangerously controlled. "I thought I left express orders for you not to approach this room. Paul has a fever, and his wrist has worsened significantly," Grace replied, standing firm. "He needs to see a doctor immediately." "Get out of the way," Patricia pushed her and entered the room, closing the door. Grace stayed in the hallway, her ear pressed against the wood. "Just look at you." Patricia's voice sounded different now that she thought she was alone with her stepson. "Always finding a way to get attention, aren't you? Especially on important days for me." "I just wanted water," Paul replied, his voice broken by pain. "No one came all day." "Water." Patricia laughed. "Do you think I have time to worry about your desires today? I have 200 VIP guests arriving in a few hours. Ministers, celebrities, the elite of this country. People who matter, Paul. Not a useless boy who can't even go to the bathroom by himself." Grace silently activated her phone's camera, recording through the small keyhole of the old lock. "Please," Paul begged. "My wrist hurts so much. I just need some medicine." "Medicine?" Patricia's voice dripped with venom. "Do you know how much your monthly medicines cost? How much your father spends on doctors, physical therapists, equipment? It would be much simpler if you just disappeared." "An accident, a medical complication. Accidents happen all the time to people like you." Even through the door, Grace could feel the terror in Paul's accelerated breathing. "You wouldn't do that," the boy murmured. "My father—" "Your father?" Patricia laughed again. "Your father barely notices your existence. He's so busy saving strangers at that hospital that he barely remembers he has a defective son at home. And when you complain, when you try to warn him, who does he believe? Me, the dedicated wife who gave up everything to take care of his disabled son." There was a moment of silence, and then the unmistakable sound of a slap. "Stop crying," Patricia hissed. "I hate it when you cry. You sound like a baby. You're weak, pathetic, just like your mother in the end." Grace felt her blood boil. She was about to burst in when she heard Patricia continue. "Tonight, after the party, we'll have a serious talk with your father. I already have the forms ready for the Institute in Canada. 3,000 miles away. There you can cry and complain all you want, no one will care." What happened next was too fast for Grace to react. There was the sound of wheels moving, a cry from Paul, something heavy falling to the floor, and then a sharp moan of pain. When Grace finally pushed the door open, she saw Paul on the floor, his wheelchair overturned a few feet away. Patricia was standing beside him, her face a mask of indifference. "See what you did?" she said, turning to Grace. "He tried to get out of bed by himself, even though he knows he shouldn't." "That's a lie," Paul cried out, his face wet with tears. "She deliberately overturned my chair. She always does that when she's angry." Patricia adjusted the immaculate dress she was wearing for the final preparations. "See how he invents things? That's why he needs specialized treatment. Delusions, manipulative behavior, aggression." Grace knelt beside Paul, checking for new injuries. His swollen wrist had hit the floor, and the boy could barely suppress his groans of pain. "This has to stop," Grace declared, standing up to face Patricia. "I'm going to show Dr. Richard the videos I recorded, all the evidence of your mistreatment." For a moment, Patricia seemed genuinely surprised. Then she regained her composure and smiled. "Videos? You really think that will work?" She adjusted a strand of hair. "Richard will never believe you. And even if he sees these supposed videos, I'll explain that they were taken out of context, manipulated. The word of an employee against mine." "Please." Patricia checked her expensive wristwatch. Now help him back to bed and get out of this room. You have an hour to finish your duties and leave this house. And never again mention these absurd accusations, or you will deeply regret it." When Patricia left, Grace carefully put Paul back in bed. The boy was trembling both from pain and fear. "I can't take this anymore," he murmured. "She's going to send me away. I'll never see my dad again." Grace held his good hand firmly. "Trust me, Paul, this ends today. I'll need your help. Are you willing?" Something in Grace's determined tone seemed to give the boy strength. He nodded, wiping away his tears. "What should I do?" "First, I'll get you some painkillers. Then, we'll wait for the right moment. When your father arrives, we'll be ready." Around 6 in the evening, the last vendors began to leave. The penthouse was transformed. Soft lights illuminated the rooms. The orchestra discreetly tuned their instruments. Waiters in immaculate uniforms received their final instructions. On the second floor, Paul had taken the painkillers Grace had managed to get and rested restlessly, awaiting the moment to act. Patricia, dressed in a stunning navy blue ball gown, covered in small crystals, supervised the final details. She seemed completely oblivious to the determination silently growing under her own roof. At 7 o'clock sharp, Dr. Richard arrived, looking tired after a long day at the hospital. Grace observed from a distance as Patricia greeted him with a kiss and led him to the master bedroom, where his formal attire awaited him. It was the moment she had been waiting for. Quickly, Grace went up to Paul's room. He was sitting on the bed, still pale, but with a determined glint in his eyes. "It's time," she said. "Your father just arrived." "I'm scared," Paul confessed. "What if he doesn't believe us?" "He will believe," Grace assured him, helping him into his wheelchair. "Because it won't just be us telling the truth. It will be her own actions and words." At 8 o'clock that evening, the first guests began to arrive. The private elevator brought elegantly dressed people, politicians, celebrities, business leaders, renowned doctors. Patricia greeted everyone with rehearsed smiles, while Dr. Richard chatted animatedly about the new pediatric wing that would be built with the funds raised that night. No one noticed the domestic worker who should have left hours ago, nor the boy in a wheelchair, hidden in a discreet corner of the corridor leading to the service elevator. Grace and Paul waited patiently, observing the movement through a crack in the door. "She'll announce the official start of the event in a few minutes," Grace whispered. "That's the moment." Paul nodded, squeezing Grace's hand tightly with his good hand. Together they waited as the ballroom filled with laughter, sophisticated conversations, and the soft sound of the string orchestra. The moment of truth had arrived. The third floor of the Montgomery penthouse shimmered under delicate lights. 200 guests in formal attire circulated among champagne flutes and trays of sophisticated canapes. The string orchestra played a soft waltz, creating the perfect atmosphere of elegance and distinction that Patricia so desired. Social magazine photographers discreetly captured the moments, while selected journalists took notes on the attendees. The mayor of Portland, the governor of Oregon, influential business leaders, famous artists, and renowned doctors. In the center of the ballroom, Dr. Richard chatted animatedly with the Minister of Health. Patricia moved among the groups, her navy blue dress shimmering under the lights, her impeccable smile never leaving her perfectly made-up face. To everyone's eyes, they were the perfect couple. He, the brilliant philanthropic neurosurgeon. She, the dedicated and socially engaged wife. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced around 9 o'clock that evening, "our hostess, Mrs. Patricia Montgomery, would like to say a few words." The guests applauded politely as Patricia ascended the small stage set up for the orchestra. Her smile was radiant as she took the microphone. "Dear friends, it is an immense honor to welcome you to our home tonight. As you all know, we are here for a noble cause, the construction of the new pediatric wing of Montgomery Hospital, which will serve underprivileged children from across the state of Oregon." More applause. Patricia waited for it to subside before continuing. "My husband, Dr. Richard Montgomery, has dedicated his life to saving lives through medicine, and I, as his wife, could not but support him in this mission. Every cent raised tonight will go directly to this project, because I deeply believe that all children deserve care, attention, and—" It was at that moment that the main elevator opened. The doors silently parted, revealing Paul in his wheelchair, pushed by Grace. The boy was pale, his visibly swollen wrist resting in his lap, but his eyes shone with determination. A murmur ran through the ballroom. Patricia interrupted her speech, momentarily confused. Dr. Richard, who was drinking champagne near the stage, turned sharply, surprise etched on his face. "Paul," he called, approaching quickly. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." Patricia regained her composure and descended from the stage with a forced smile. "Dear guests, I apologize for the interruption. This is Paul, my husband's son. He should be resting, but apparently decided to join us." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes shot daggers at Grace. "And this is our employee who seems to have forgotten that her shift ended hours ago." Dr. Richard approached his son, genuine concern on his face. "Are you all right, son? Why didn't you tell me you wanted to participate? We would have prepared everything for you." Paul took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Dad, I need to talk to you. It's important." Patricia quickly intervened. "Darling, Paul isn't well. He's been having confused episodes lately, remember? Let's take him back to his room and we'll talk after the party." "No," Paul exclaimed, his voice surprisingly firm. "I'm tired of being silenced, tired of having my reality denied." The ballroom was now completely silent. The guests watched the scene with discomfort and curiosity. "Patricia has systematically mistreated me since you got married," Paul continued, looking directly at his father. "She hides my medicine, leaves me without food, humiliates me and—" his voice faltered for a moment, "and physically assaults me when you're not around." Dr. Richard paled. Patricia let out a nervous laugh. "See what I told you? Delusions." The psychiatrist warned that this could happen. She turned to the guests. "Paul had difficulty accepting our union. Unfortunately, he developed manipulative behavior, creating stories to get attention." Richard seemed torn between his son and his wife. "Paul, we've talked about this. Patricia only wants what's best for you. These accusations are serious and unfounded." "They are not unfounded," Grace intervened, stepping forward. "I witnessed the mistreatment, and more than that, I documented it." Patricia advanced, furious. "How dare you? This woman," she pointed at Grace, addressing the guests, "was caught trying to steal my jewelry. She's trying to get revenge for being discovered." "That's a lie," Grace protested. "I never touched your jewelry." "This accusation was fabricated to intimidate me after I discovered the truth." Dr. Richard raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. "Enough. This is neither the time nor the place for this kind of discussion. Paul, let's go back to your room. Grace, consider yourself fired. And Patricia, please resume the event. Our guests don't need to witness this embarrassment." That's when Grace took the USB drive from her pocket. "Dr. Richard, before you make any decisions, I believe you should see this." She walked to the audiovisual system installed for presentations during the event and connected the device. The enormous projection screen, initially intended to show images of the new pediatric wing project, lit up. "What do you think you're doing?" Patricia hissed, trying to stop her. "Showing the truth," Grace replied simply. The first video began to play. The image showed Patricia in Paul's room, yelling at him for spilling a glass of water. "Look at the mess you made, you useless thing. Can't even do that right? Why don't you just disappear?" The ballroom plunged into a deathly silence. In the video, Patricia shoved the wheelchair against the wall, making Paul cry out in pain. "Clean it up, clean it with your hands. I want to see you crawl like the worm you are." Dr. Richard staggered, leaning on a nearby table. His face was ashen, disbelieving. This can't be real," he murmured. "It's edited," Patricia protested, desperate. "Manipulated. This woman wants to destroy us." The second video began. It showed Patricia hiding Paul's medications in a locked drawer. "No medicine today. You don't deserve relief after what you did." The camera clearly captured Paul's face contorted in pain, pleading for the painkiller. Grace paused the playback. "There's much more. 12 videos documenting weeks of mistreatment, threats, and neglect." Dr. Richard approached the screen, horror growing in his eyes with each second. "Paul, son, you tried to tell me." "Many times," Paul replied, tears streaming down his face, "but you never believed me." The third video started automatically. It was the most recent, recorded that same day. It showed Patricia purposely overturning the wheelchair, knocking Paul down, and then threatening to send him to a distant institute. "See how I was right about his wrist?" Grace asked. "It wasn't an accident, and he needs urgent medical attention." Dr. Richard finally woke from his state of shock. He approached his son, carefully examining the swollen, purplish wrist. "My God, it looks fractured." He looked around, his voice choked. "Could someone please call an ambulance?" One of the guests, a renowned orthopedist, stepped forward. "I can take a look while we wait." Patricia, realizing she was losing control of the situation, tried one last desperate move. "Richard, darling, don't be fooled. This woman manipulated these videos. Paul is probably faking, as he always does. Remember what the psychiatrist said. Attention-seeking behavior." Dr. Richard looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Enough, Patricia. I saw with my own eyes. I heard your voice. I recognized our room, our clothes, even the date on the digital clock in the background. These videos are real." "Richard, you can't—" "Enough!" The doctor's voice echoed through the ballroom. "I spent years believing you instead of my own son. Years denying what he tried to tell me. Years allowing him to suffer under the same roof where he should have been protected." Richard turned to Paul, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "Son, I am so sorry, so very sorry. I failed you in every possible way. I will never forgive myself for this." Patricia, seeing her world crumble, changed tactics. Artificial tears welled in her eyes. "Richard, please, everything I did was for us. This boy was destroying our marriage, our life. He always hated me, always tried to separate us." "Separate you?" Paul's voice trembled. "All I wanted was to be part of the family, to have a new mother, to be accepted." One of the event security guards approached discreetly. "Doctor, the police have been called. One of the guests contacted authorities after seeing the evidence." Patricia paled. "Police? This is absurd. Richard, you won't let me be humiliated like this, will you? After everything we've built?" "Doctor." Richard slowly rose, his face a mask of pain and determination. "What have we built, Patricia? A facade, a life based on lies and my son's suffering." He approached her, his voice low but firm. "You manipulated all of us, me, our friends, society. You created an image of a dedicated wife and stepmother while abusing a defenseless child under my own roof. And I, blinded by work and your lies, allowed it to happen. Richard, be reasonable. This will destroy your reputation, the hospital, everything we've worked to build." "No, Patricia. What would destroy everything would be to continue pretending I didn't see what I just saw." At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers emerged from the elevator, accompanied by a man in a suit, clearly an investigator. "Mrs. Patricia Montgomery," the older officer called, "we need you to come with us to give a statement regarding serious accusations of child abuse against minor Paul Montgomery." Patricia looked around, desperate, seeking support among the guests. She found only looks of repulsion and shock. Some discreetly moved away, others whispered among themselves. Journalists who had been invited to cover the charity event now had a very different and more impactful story to report. "This is absurd," she protested as the police approached. "I am Patricia Montgomery, Dr. Richard Montgomery's wife. You cannot treat me like this." "Ma'am, we have sufficient preliminary evidence to take you to the precinct," the investigator replied, keeping his voice professional. "The charges are serious, aggravated child abuse against a vulnerable person, assault, threat. You have the right to remain silent and to have an attorney present during questioning." As the police escorted her to the elevator, Patricia cast one last look at Richard, a mixture of anger, desperation, and, for the first time, genuine fear. "You'll regret this, all of you." After her departure, a heavy silence hung over the ballroom. The charity event, carefully planned for weeks, had turned into a scene of public exposure of family abuse. Dr. Richard turned to the guests, visibly shaken. "I apologize to everyone for what you witnessed tonight. Obviously, the event is concluded. I thank you for your presence and understanding." Most guests began to discreetly leave, many expressing support for Richard and Paul before departing. Some doctors present offered to help with immediate care for the boy while awaiting the ambulance. Amidst the confusion, Richard approached Grace, who remained by. Paul sighed. "I have no words to thank you for what you did," he said, his voice choked. "When everyone failed, Paul, including myself, you had the courage to do what was right." Grace shook her head. "I did no more than my duty as a human being, Doctor. Paul is an incredible boy who deserves to be protected and loved. How could I have been so blind?" Richard lamented, running a hand through his hair. "All the times he tried to tell me, I chose not to believe." "The important thing is that now you know the truth," Grace replied softly, "and you can begin to repair the damage." The ambulance arrived minutes later. As paramedics prepared Paul for transport, Richard made a promise to his son. "From today on, everything will be different. I will be present, I will listen, I will believe in you. I will never again allow anyone to harm you. Never again." Paul, despite the physical pain, smiled for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile of hope. "I know, Dad, I believe in you." As the ambulance departed, taking father and son to the hospital, Grace remained in the nearly empty penthouse, with only a few staff discreetly dismantling the failed event. She looked around at the luxury that had hidden so much suffering and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Her phone rang. It was Luke, her eldest son, worried she hadn't come home. As she briefly explained what had happened, Grace realized she had done more than save a boy from abuse. She had restored her own faith in justice and the courage to do what is right regardless of the consequences. "I'll be home soon, son," she promised, gathering her few belongings. "And I have an important story to tell you and your sister." Leaving the Montgomery penthouse for the last time, Grace knew the battle wasn't over. There would be depositions, investigations, perhaps a lawsuit. But for the first time in weeks, she felt that Paul was finally safe, and that for her was worth any sacrifice. 3 months had passed since the night that forever changed the lives of the Montgomery and Oliver families. Portland was now experiencing the first warmth of spring, with yellow trumpet trees blooming across the city, contrasting with the intensely blue sky. St. Luke's Hospital, one of the largest in the Montgomery network, received a special visitor that morning. Paul, now looking very different, flushed cheeks, bright eyes, and an easy smile, maneuvered his wheelchair through the corridors with ease, greeting nurses and doctors who recognized him. Beside him, Grace walked calmly, carrying a small fruit basket. "Do you think she'll like the grapes?" Paul asked, looking at the basket. "Mom loved green grapes." "All pregnant women love fresh fruit," Grace assured him. "Your little sister will love them, even if indirectly." They stopped before room 304 in the maternity ward. Paul knocked softly, and a feminine voice invited them in. Lying in the hospital bed, Amy, Grace's 12-year-old daughter, held a small bundle in her arms. Beside her, Luke, now 16, delicately adjusted the blanket wrapped around the baby. "Look who came to meet Julia," Amy announced, gently lifting the baby so Paul could see. Paul moved his chair closer, his eyes wide with admiration. "She's so tiny. Can I hold her?" Luke helped position Paul's arms correctly, and Amy carefully transferred the newborn to him. The teenager was completely fascinated by the tiny human breathing softly in his arms. "She looks like you." "Amy," Paul commented, observing the baby's delicate features. "She got her grandmother's beauty," Grace joked, stroking her daughter's hair. "How do you feel, my warrior?" "Tired but happy," Amy replied, a teenager who had grown up quickly in recent months, taking on responsibilities that life had imposed on her. "Dr. Marcus said we can go home tomorrow." The room door opened again and Dr. Richard entered, wearing the traditional white lab coat with his name embroidered on the pocket. He smiled at the familiar scene. "I see my son is already doing the honors as an uncle," he commented, approaching to examine Amy's chart. "Everything looks excellent. Julia has perfect indicators, and you're recovering very well. Amy." The story of how these two families became intertwined had dominated Portland news for weeks after the incident at the Montgomery penthouse. What began as a scandal involving an abusive stepmother had transformed into a moving story of courage, redemption, and new beginnings. On the night the videos were exposed, Paul was diagnosed with a fractured wrist and signs of mild malnutrition. During his recovery in the hospital, Dr. Richard, devastated by the guilt of having ignored his son's suffering for so long, made decisions that would completely change their lives. First, He offered Grace not only reinstatement to her job, but a promotion to head housekeeper of his residence, with a much higher salary and benefits that included family health insurance. Upon discovering that she and her children lived in precarious conditions, he proposed that they move into the penthouse, where there was more than enough space. Initially reluctant, Grace eventually accepted when she realized how important her presence was for Paul's emotional recovery. During the criminal investigation against Patricia, disturbing facts came to light. She had previously worked at another hospital, from which she had been discreetly dismissed after accusations of mistreating vulnerable patients. It was also discovered that she had consulted lawyers specializing in inheritance law shortly after the marriage, seeking to ensure access to Richard's assets should anything happen to Paul or the doctor himself. There was also evidence that she planned to institutionalize Paul in a remote facility to consolidate her control over the family's assets. The court case was still ongoing, but Patricia's preventive detention had been maintained, given the seriousness of the accusations and the risk of intimidation to the victim and witnesses. The story, amplified by the presence of journalists at the charity event, ended up generating a national debate on mistreatment of people with disabilities and the importance of giving a voice to the vulnerable. "I brought some news," Richard said, sitting beside Amy's bed. "The judge accepted the temporary guardianship request. You and Julia can officially remain under our care until you reach adulthood." Amy smiled, relieved. The teenage pregnancy, a result of a brief relationship with a schoolmate who disappeared upon hearing the news, had been a shock to everyone. But with the support of her mother, Luke, and surprisingly the Montgomery family, she had managed to continue her studies through homeschooling and now planned to return to school next semester. "Thank you, Dr. Richard," she said, her voice choked, "for everything." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "We're a family now, Amy. An unconventional family, perhaps, but a family." This was perhaps the biggest transformation in recent months, the way Richard had completely restructured his priorities. The doctor who once practically lived at the hospital now delegated responsibilities, refused non-essential surgeries, and was home every night to have dinner with Paul and the Olivers. On Sunday mornings, it was common to find him in the kitchen, trying often unsuccessfully to prepare pancakes for everyone. Paul had also blossomed. With intensive physical therapy and appropriate psychological support, he had made surprising physical progress. Regular aquatic physical therapy sessions had strengthened his muscles, and he had recently started taking his first steps with the aid of light crutches. More important than his physical progress was his emotional transformation. The boy who was once isolated and fearful now had Luke as an older brother, Amy as a confidant, and Grace as a loving maternal figure who never tried to replace the memory of his biological mother, but offered a new kind of maternal love. "I almost forgot," Richard said, taking an envelope from his lab coat pocket. "I received the response from the State University of Oregon. They loved your project idea, Grace." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. In recent months, inspired by her experience, she had developed a university extension project to train health professionals in identifying signs of abuse in vulnerable patients. With Richard's support, who had used his academic contacts, the project was being considered for implementation. "Approved with distinction," she read, her eyes moist, "with a recommendation for national expansion through the Department of Health." "Which means," Richard explained to the younger ones, "that Grace's work will help train doctors, nurses, and social workers across the country to recognize situations of abuse like Paul experienced, and to intervene appropriately." "That's amazing, Mom," Luke exclaimed, hugging her. "And there's more," Richard continued. "The program coordinator suggested you consider studying social work. They are willing to offer a full scholarship given the potential impact of your project." Grace was speechless. At 42, she had never imagined the possibility of attending university. Her youthful dream, interrupted by the need to work after Luke's pregnancy, now seemed within reach. "I don't know if I could," she began. "Of course you can," Paul affirmed with conviction. "You're the smartest and bravest person I know, and will help at home," Luke added. "I can take care of Julia when Amy is at school." "We'll all support you," Richard agreed. "You changed our lives, Grace. It's only fair that you can achieve your dreams too." Baby Julia began to whimper in Paul's arms, who carefully returned her to Amy. "I think someone's hungry," Amy commented, adjusting to breastfeed her daughter. The men discreetly left the room, leaving mother and daughter with the newborn. In the hallway, Paul looked at Richard and Luke, a mischievous smile on his lips. "Do you guys think Grace will like the birthday surprise on Sunday?" "If she doesn't suspect by then," Luke replied. "My mom has a sixth sense for secrets." "The hospital staff is excited," Richard commented. "Many want to personally meet the woman who inspired the new protocol for protecting vulnerable patients that we're implementing across the network." Paul adjusted himself in his chair, a gesture he now made naturally. "You know what I like most about this whole story? That it started with someone society considered invisible, a domestic worker, saving someone who was being silenced. Me." Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride and love. "That's why your idea for the community center is so important, Paul, giving a voice to the invisible." The project Richard referred to was the family's latest endeavor. Instead of just building a new pediatric wing, as originally planned, Montgomery Hospital would now also develop an adjacent community center, specifically for people with disabilities from low-income families. The center would offer free physical therapy, psychological support and legal guidance, as well as training courses for caregivers. Speaking of which, Paul reminded them, "We have a meeting with the architects tomorrow to finalize the access ramp project." "At 10 o'clock, Richard confirmed. "And then we can stop by the shelter to see how Thor is doing." Thor was the latest addition to the family, a service dog Paul was helping to train. The animal, a Labrador rescued from a shelter, was being prepared not only to assist Paul, but to become the first in an assistance dog program that the community center would implement. As they walked down the hospital corridor, several staff members greeted Dr. Richard and Paul by name. The transformation in the Montgomery family dynamic had also extended to the professional environment. Richard, once known for his brilliant career but distant personality, was now seen as a more humanized and accessible doctor. "Dr. Montgomery," a nurse called, approaching hastily. "The patient in 512 woke up from surgery and is asking for you." "I'll see him right now," Richard replied. Turning to Paul and Luke, he added, "I'll meet you at the cafeteria in half an hour. You can order those French fries you both like so much, but don't tell Grace." The two teenagers laughed, complicit. As Richard walked away to attend to his patient, Luke pushed Paul's chair toward the elevators. "You know, Paul," Luke commented as they waited, "sometimes I think all this seems like a dream. 4 months ago we were living in that cramped townhouse in Laurelhurst, my mom cleaning houses to pay the bills, Amy hiding her pregnancy out of fear. And now we're here." Paul nodded thoughtfully. "And I was trapped in that room, counting the days until my dad would notice my existence, fearing every moment alone with Patricia." "Life takes turns, doesn't it?" "Yes, but I think it wasn't just luck or destiny," Paul reflected. "It was your mum's courage, her determination not to look away when she saw something wrong." "And your courage too," Luke added. "Facing your dad and all those important guests couldn't have been easy." The elevator arrived and they stepped in. Paul pressed the button for the ground floor. "You know what impresses me most?" Paul continued, "How people society often ignores can make a difference. Your mom was just a domestic worker in Patricia's eyes. I was just a boy with a disability. Your sister is now just a teenage mother. And look what we achieved together," Luke completed. The elevator doors opened into the hospital's main lobby, revealing a spacious and bright area where patients, visitors, and professionals circulated. On the opposite wall, a large panel displayed the updated mission of Montgomery Hospital: care, cure, and empower, because every voice matters. Paul smiled as he read the words he himself had suggested during the restructuring of the institution's philosophy. They were more than a corporate mission statement. They were a testament to how truth, when finally heard, has the power to transform entire lives. As they crossed the lobby toward the cafeteria, Paul thought about how his story, which began with silence and pain, had transformed into a narrative of hope and renewal, and how the courage of a woman invisible in the eyes of society had unleashed a wave of changes that would now benefit countless other vulnerable people. "I'm thinking about medicine." Paul said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "To study when I finish high school. Medicine, like my dad. But I want to specialize in physical rehabilitation to help people like me." Luke smiled. "I think you'd be an incredible doctor." "And you?" "Still want engineering." "Accessibility engineering," Luke confirmed. "Someone needs to design a world where people like you can move without barriers." Sitting in the hospital cafeteria, sharing forbidden French fries and plans for the future, the two teenagers symbolized the new reality they had built together. One where respect had replaced abuse, where truth had conquered manipulation, and where families could be defined not by blood, but by mutual love and care. When Richard joined them half an hour later, he found Paul animatedly drawing on a napkin the design of a physical therapy device he had imagined, while Luke pointed out improvements in the design. "Already planning to revolutionize medicine before even getting into college?" Richard joked, sitting with them. "How was your patient?" Paul asked. "He'll make a full recovery. He's a strong boy like you." Richard observed his son, not just biologically his, but truly his son in the deepest sense of the word, and felt a wave of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance to be a father, for the opportunity to truly know Paul, for having found a new family in Grace and her children. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Of all of you." On that sunny spring afternoon, as Julia took her first breaths of life, the family that had formed through pain, courage, and redemption celebrated not just a birth, but a collective rebirth. The journey had not been easy, and they would still face challenges ahead, but now they knew that together, each with their unique and important voice, they could overcome any obstacle. And it all began because an ordinary woman, exhausted and invisible in the eyes of society, chose to do what was right, even when it meant risking everything. A choice that, like ripples in a pond, would continue to expand to touch countless other lives, far beyond that moment and that place. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Grace, Paul, and their families has touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that courage can emerge in the most unexpected places, and that our actions, even when we seem invisible, can transform entire lives. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel to receive new stories of triumph and hope daily. Activate the bell to be notified whenever we publish new content. Your like is essential so that more people can discover these inspiring narratives. We have prepared a special playlist with equally touching stories about courage and new beginnings. Just click on the link to your left. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice and your story also matter to us. We'll be back tomorrow with a new narrative to move your day. Thank you for joining us on this journey of emotion.